Good afternoon. JT's topic has reminded me of my own experiences in shop class. Coach Battle, I came into his class the first day and he found out I wasn't right-handed and he declared me wrong-handed. And that lasted through almost college of being wrong-handed. JT's explored craftsmanship this year. He's explored the idea of adding shop class to the liberal arts tradition that has traditionally taught students to think about things that are true, good, and beautiful. And JT has considered and asked the question, what it would look like to create things that are good, true, and beautiful. He's going to argue for the addition to shop class to the liberal arts education, not only to understand beauty, but also to be able to create it. Let me introduce his panel. We have Brent Stevens, the upper school head here at Covenant. We have Andrew Elizalde, the math and science department chair and academic dean. And we have John Davis, an art instructor at Northside High School. JT, let me pray for you. Father, I thank you for the creativity, the craftsmanship, and the beauty that you are the God of, that you create beautiful things, that you are the God of beautiful things. And I thank you for that. I thank you that we can look at the things that are made and we can worship you, and that we can know you exist, and we can know your loving care for us. Father, I ask that you would let JT know as he comes up here that your loving care for him extends even into moments when he is anxious or nervous. And I ask that you would calm him and that you would give him courage and wisdom as he speaks. In your name we pray. Amen.
I would like y'all to imagine with me that you or your family has decided to start renovating your kitchen. And by doing that, you want to put in new cabinets. So you take out the old ones, but instead of wanting to go to a regular old department store and get cabinets there, you decide to start from scratch and have a carpenter make them for you. So you do some research online and you look for a carpenter that you think can be trusted, who has done good work before, and you go down to interview him. And as you're walking through his shop, he's telling you about different types of wood that he can use, different types of stains, designs. And you look over on his workbench and you notice things that you would normally think to see, like a hammer, a chisel, some wood glue. And along with that, you notice 3 random books strewn to the side in the corner. Something written by Plato, Aesthetics by Hildebrand, and A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. You're confused as what this classical literature has to do with this carpenter and his shop, and what those books could, and what this shop could be look like in a classical education. So at the end of your trip, you're asking him, why do you have these books? Just out of curiosity. And he answers simply that he just doesn't only want to make furniture. He doesn't want to just make cabinets to where you put your dishes in where they're stored. He wants to make something beautiful, so that when you or your family goes into your kitchen, that beauty impacts you in a way that makes you feel comfortable. You appreciate beauty even if you realize it or not. So that kitchen becomes a place where you can grow with your family and experience God's glory in it. And this is why shop class should be integrated into classical education, not only for the skills that a student could acquire in this class, but also for how their relationship with God could grow through that. Before we can integrate shop class into classical education, we must first look at what classical education's goal is. Robert Littlejohn, who taught at the University of California, Berkeley, wrote the book Wisdom and Eloquence. And in this book, he discusses the foundation of which schools should implement classical education in. He discusses that the goal of classical education is to grow morality and virtue in our students, so that they are able to identify what is true, good, and beautiful. So that whenever these students go out into the world, they were able to see the beauty that God has created and the truth that he has put into our world, and be able to reflect that back onto our own souls, and grow. But it also enables us to identify what is bad and evil and ugly, and things that our society says is good, but what isn't, and so that we can refrain that from being a detriment to our souls. Mortimer Adler, who is one of the biggest faces of classical education today, wrote the book Paideia Proposal. In this, he discusses the 3 columns of our education. The first one being learning knowledge, the second one being cultivating that knowledge, and finally, understanding and appreciating ideas and values. He agrees that we should be in a classroom and that we should learn from a teacher and then take that information of what we have learned, memorize it, write it down on the test, but also to appreciate things like the fine arts, such as theater, art, sculpture, things that are seen as beautiful, things that can impact our soul and grow us in virtue and morality. And finally, here at Covenant, we see what the portrait of a graduate and how it wants our students to become. There are many categories in the portrait of a graduate, but two that I would like to focus on are delighting in beauty and cultivating our ideas and our tools of learning. These two, a shop class can accomplish. Not only the beauty that we can build and that we can study, that God has shown us is beautiful, which will impact us in our walk with Him, but also the tools that we can learn from what we have learned in classical education and apply it into a shop class. But Dorothy L. Sayers says that there is something missing from classical education. She says that students are failing to be able to learn for themselves. In this, she is saying that a teacher teaches a student some information. They memorize it and they write it down on a test, and then they forget. They don't see the practical application of the things that they are learning in class and how that can be used to learn more. And since the goal of our education is to be able to take what we learn here and be able to go out into the world to learn more and spread the gospel and be able to be founded in truth and wisdom, we need to be able to see how our education can impact other things. So how does a shop class impact a student's walk with Christ? When God created us, He created us in His image. And as image bearers, whenever we do something that resembles what God has done, that is worship. J.R.R. Tolkien calls this subcreation. Subcreation is whenever we work with our hands and do something that God has done, like create something. We are worshiping Him through that. In Tolkien's case, these are his books and his literature. He creates his own worlds, his own people, his own languages, his own geography. And then he riddles morals and values throughout these stories so that whenever a person reads this, they are reading something that is beautiful and that has value and that is impacting their soul and growing them. It is impacting their soul and growing them towards Christ. A good example of this is by a man named Brother Lawrence. Brother Lawrence, when he was 18, was watching a tree and watching it go through the seasons. And while he was doing this, he realized that there had to be a creator in our world. He realized that this could not have just happened just out of no reason at all. So he went and he joined a monastery. And while he was there, he was given simple tasks like tending to a garden. He hated tending the garden. It was something that he despised doing. And he would look around and see other people doing these types of tasks and was very frustrated because they were worshiping God while they were doing it. And so he went to a fellow monk and asked him, "Why am I not growing like the rest of my fellow monks here? Why am I not worshiping God?" And the monk told him it's because he's failing to acknowledge the beauty that is around him. Whenever he tends the gardens and the way that it looks along with the monastery and the architecture, it's beautiful. And what the monastery represents is devotion to God. And so when people see this, they are impacted in a strong way so that their soul grows and flourishes. Plato says that our soul grows wings in the sight of beauty. And after hearing this, he goes back to do jobs. And the name of the book that he wrote this in is The Practice of the Presence of God. It's realizing everything that we do, we should do to His glory, and that in that we are doing something beautiful that can also impact others. But how does this look in a shop class for a student? With a student, they can say the student has worked long and hard on a project, let's say a table. It's took them half a semester or more. And they take it home and it's crafted beautifully and their family eats there. While they're eating there, that's not the only purpose of that table. That table becomes a vessel in which this family can grow in their relationships with each other, but also with God. It becomes a place where the parents can bring their children and teach them the catechisms. teach them Bible stories, grow their faith in God. And it becomes a place where they can bring friends over and have real discussions, talk about God and what they believe. It becomes a place of good news, but a place of bad news as well. It becomes a place of celebration and mourning. This table is not only a table, but works in people's lives so that while they are there, they are growing in morality and virtue because of the beauty that this thing represents. And now I will look at how shop class is represented practically in classical education. In a shop class, let's say a student here has taken physics, geometry, and history. Now, typically shop class has not been included in liberal arts, and the 7 liberal arts consist of arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music, grammar, dialect, and rhetoric. These 7 were seen as most essential for a student to learn so that they can grow in their faith and also in morality and virtue. But shop class can pull from these. With that example of a student who has taken these classes here, let's say they walk into a shop class and the teacher presents them with a problem. The teacher presents them with an issue that goes all the way back to the medieval times. Back before the cathedrals and the great churches we have today, their churches were small and dark. They didn't feel like it was a church. It felt like a place that they had to be and that God wasn't with them. So the architects and the artisans wanted to come up with a way to be able to make people feel like they were in the presence of God. So they wanted to create big structures with high vaulted walls, beautiful ceilings, beautiful arches, stained glass windows, to resemble God's beauty and his glory and his vastness, so that when people walked into a church, they felt like God was there with him. But they ran into one problem. The only materials that they had back in that day were wood and stone. You could make a cathedral out of wood, but that would be very difficult, and 2, it wouldn't stand up to the elements. It would start to collapse and deteriorate. And the architects and artisans did not want the image of God's church, this grand building, to be falling apart. What message does that say about our God? It shows that he is not everlasting and that he will not be with us forever. So they decided to make these buildings out of stone. But the problem with stone is that it doesn't flex very well. So whenever they built these high walls and these beautiful ceilings, the ceilings that were made out of stone were way too heavy for these walls to hold up. So the ceiling would come down and force the walls out. And the teacher could ask the student, what would we do to keep those walls up? Now, the students would be working in a group. So one student can remember from history class how we learned about flying buttresses. And these were these rib cage-like structures on the side of buildings that looked like they were going straight into the wall, connected to very strong and heavy pillars. And a student could say, well, the energy coming down from the roof is forcing the walls out. So if we connect these arches to the side of the building, it can take that energy and send it straight into the ground through those tall pillars. Therefore, the walls would stay up. And then another person could come in and know exactly what angles we need to put these arches at so that the energy isn't unevenly distributed between the wall. And so this takes what we have learned in things such as a history class, a physics class, and a geometry class. And it takes what we have learned and shown kids and some students in a more relaxed environment where they are willing to experiment with their ideas and where it's not wrong or right, but it's what can we try? And so they can build miniature models of these buttresses. And that in itself, them trying and working, is worshiping God. But it's also resembling what these churches represent. And they're studying things that have impacted people for hundreds of years. These cathedrals were how most people in Europe were taught the gospel and flourished in their relationship with him. There are a few more benefits practically that a shop class can bring to a student. Say a student has taken a shop class here for 4 years, and they don't really feel called to college. That student has taken shop class and has decided to go into a trade school. There are many schools across the country that take students that want to do these types of things, but 2 of them are the Universal Technical Institute and the Wyoming Technical Institute. These two schools have a 96% graduation rate for students that go to these schools and a 98% rate for a job after 1 year after graduating. There is a big need for students and young people to go into these trade schools because we are losing people in that part of the workforce. And we don't only need them here in America. We also need students to go overseas and help out people there. This shop class can be a place where people learn how to help build buildings for people on missionary trips, go overseas and help people in Italy that need plaster workers and welders to help with their infrastructure. We need multiple people to go into these different types of jobs because that is what's needed. And it also gives us as Christians a chance to spread the word to people and circles that we wouldn't reach otherwise. So for students who do feel called towards that and don't think college is right for them, this should be something that should be considered if you like working with your hands and you're not afraid to get dirty. But other than that, there are multiple jobs that need these people, and we are a good workforce to go into that. Which brings me back to the carpenter's workshop. In the carpenter's workshop, he wants us as students not to be consumed with the things of this world and get connected back to the things that we make. In A Brave New World, it's a dystopian novel about a society that is being controlled by the government because it's being told what is beautiful. They are being presented with things such as sex, pornography, entertainment, and material things that don't matter. They keep having to replace these things for these people in the world because they find no value and it doesn't bring them anything but pain. But go back to that student who built that table. If the leg on that table broke, would that student just get rid of it and get a new one? Would that student just look at that table and be like, that means nothing to me? No, the family would want to look and fix that table and the broken leg and find a new one and find a way to repair it because of the value that our items have. And so it should be a warning to us about how the things of this world and the things that the world tells us are beautiful are not beautiful. Something that you would see on social media as this is fine, everybody does it. Is that something that you would do here? And so going back, the way that shop class lets us look at things is let us look through the lens of what God sees as beautiful and not what our society sees. So the purpose of a shop class is not to teach every student how to make a chair, fix a spark plug in their car. It's to make them appreciate the beauty of what God has made and something that we have lost in the past. And that's why we should give students these skills, but also focus on the relationship with God and how we can help them grow in that. Thank you.
Well done. Well done, JT. I'll now turn it over to your panel.
All right, well done. You saved your best presentation for last, so way to go.
Thank you.
Okay, so my first question is it possible to train a student in wisdom and eloquence, or as you phrase it, morality and virtue, in a school entirely devoted to vocational training?
Like vocational, like working with your hands and things such as that, like carpentry? Yes. No, in Mortimer Adler's Paideia proposal, his third column, which I think shop class fits into, is appreciating ideas and beauty and values. But his two other ones talk about in classroom work and teaching and giving those students and then mentoring them on what they have learned so that they can develop what they have learned. But also it talks about like the Socratic method of teaching. And so I think we need to contain the liberal arts as they are, but introduce shop class as well, because they work together and they shouldn't work apart, because it takes things from liberal education and includes into shop class.
So you've made an argument for shop class to be a critical part of a classical education, even at a school like our own. And the shop class that you've described includes students, quote, creating and building things and, quote, striving to find beauty in them. So how does shop class in particular uniquely enhance a student's experience in a way that is not already possible or already happening in the traditional painting, drawing, ceramics, or sculpture classes at our school and other classical schools?
Mhm. The benefit of a shop class that would have other than art is, one, the practical benefit of learning how to work with things, but it connects students back into being able to use the tools that they have learned and be able to replicate different things throughout history, like such things that you could do. Like going back to the flying buttress is it's taking something that is beautiful and that we look to and say that that is beautiful. And it gives students a benefit to work with their hands and replicate that, but also appreciate things that God has created, like physics in our world and how they work, and like the geometry of it and the history of it. And so I think that you can have that in a shop class that you necessarily couldn't get from like a theater class or a fine arts class.
Good, JT, you state in your paper that the liberal arts are made up of arithmetic, rhetoric, music, astronomy, dialectic, geometry, and physics. These are seen as the most valuable content a student can learn in their K through 12 education. Carpentry classes are not included in the curriculum. And you say that since carpentry is not mentioned, it's not seen as something worth learning when compared to other subjects, because those who established classical education did not include it. What factors do you think should determine a subject's worth or relevancy?
I think when the liberal arts were first being done, it was by Plato and building off of what they have learned. And I think for us here at this like classical school, I think what makes shop class a necessity for our education is how it can grow a student's relationship with Christ while also teaching them values in growing a student's relationship with Christ, but also teaching them skills. And so it's building off of things in liberal education, combining that with God's beauty and how it impacts us and how it can impact others, and then giving students skills to be able to do that on their own. Maybe not to the full extent of a carpenter, but in a smaller way and sense.
Awesome. Okay, so in your introduction, you invite us to imagine what it might be like to work with a Plato reading cabinet maker. Can you for a moment speak to a carpenter who sees no value in reading philosophy or literature? Why should he pick up any one of the classics and devote himself to the same kind of study that your well-read carpenter has?
What I would say to that carpenter is that if he doesn't like these books that talk about beauty and how it impacts us, even if you're a Christian or not, it has been seen for people that when even in Dietrich von Hildebrand's Aesthetics, he talks about how beauty, whenever we're in the presence of it, even if we realize it or not, we are benefited by that, and it grows our soul and our morality and virtue. And so for him, if he's like ignoring beauty and saying like, I'm only building cabinets for people to use them and only as a utilitarian way, I don't think that because beauty, according to Hildebrand, makes us more contemplative and able to see what is wicked and not good for us. And so if he's ignoring that, I think the danger of that is making people not contemplate and not appreciate beauty. And Ernest Hello has a quote about how if we don't contemplate, it makes you a mediocre person. And the mediocre person only has one goal of passion, namely the hatred of the beautiful. And so I think the danger in ignoring these things are hating the beautiful and in a sense also hating what God has done and hating him for what he's done for us. So I think that's the danger.
So by reading Paradise Lost, he could make better cabinets because of experiencing the beauty of lyric poetry or epic poetry. He would have a heightened sense of what a beautiful cabinet could be?
It's been a very long time since I've read Paradise Lost.
That's
So
that's what you're saying in a roundabout way.
yes, but I think that there are specific books that would help more than others. And of course, not every great book or classical literature is going to be beneficial, but there are some, and they speak onto it, and they speak on it in a very strong way, and that this is something that we need, and it's not in everyone, of course.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So you've made an argument that classical Christian schools should not be so obsessed with college acceptance
Mhm.
that they neglect to equip students with the tools that they may need to become carpenters, plumbers, and welders. Is there any limit to the kind and amount of vocational training, particularly training focused on manual or hands-on labor, that a classical Christian school should offer to students? What determines, in other words, when we stop offering things? Is there a limit to it?
Of course. And when I was writing my paper, I was looking at it as like we have unlimited opportunities, unlimited money, unlimited staff. But of course, there are going to be some jobs that like there might just be kids that just don't take them. And that is a threat to shop class. And that's happened in public schools is in Matthew Crawford's Shop Classes Soulcraft, he talks about how there was a shift away from shop class and towards computer science. And so multiple kids got out of those classes and went to those because that's where our future is headed and that's where jobs are. And so I think that, yes, there probably is going to be a boundary like, well, we're not going to have a plumbing class like specifically, but for a school to have things such as like a welding class, but include that all into one class of kids like, here, like I want to weld today, or I want to work with wood today, and not make it separate classes.
Since adding a shop class might be financially and logistically difficult, are there other ways the desired skills could be integrated into current classes through projects and hands-on learning?
Yeah, yes. In history class or for physics class, an example, in history class, you could look at things such as the flying buttresses and work on that as like a day project and on a smaller level. But also in physics with like a catapult, it's like, hey, let's give them instructions on how to build like a miniature catapult and then work through the physics of it and how it works. And then you're able to see God's creation and how it's worked, but also not have a full class for it and become like a day project for them. And yes, it could be done.
All right, Chief, last round from your panel. How do you feel?
Amazing.
All right, so speak to those of us in the audience who are intimidated by the trades, whether that's basic carpentry, auto mechanics, or plumbing. Should we try to fix our own stuff? And if yes, how will doing so benefit us?
No, well, it's complicated because if a student were to work a long time, build a chair, but the chair's length was uneven, that is one of the most annoying things, is to sit down in a chair and then you just tilt backwards. And so like that, it's like, okay, like he learned and now he knows some things that needs to improve on, but we also need to know our limits, and that like if your pipes are exploding in your bathroom, you can't just like go grab some flex tape and just slap it on there and hope that it stays that way. And you would actually need someone who's a professional to be able to come in and work with that.
Yeah, I've been that guy who. So you've argued that including shop class in a liberal arts curriculum will connect students to the real world in a more personal way than is possible with the subject of the traditional liberal arts curriculum. And so I can begin to imagine a great variety of classes that students could take that they would be interested in because of some perceived immediate and obvious personal connection to the quote real world. Mm-hmm. So for a school with limited resources and has to have criteria for what they do and do not do, you might consider examples like you've named: metal shop, cooking, auto mechanics, photography, robotics, computer programming, et cetera, et cetera. So one, among all the options that are out there for schools to add, Have you found shop class to be the most compelling choice? And if you have, what criteria are you using to highlight shop class to add over all the other options that would be available to us?
Could you restate your question? I'm sorry.
Sure. Since there are a lot of different classes that could connect a student to the real world because of a perceived personal and immediate connection, why choose shop class in particular when there are so many options of classes that you can add? So what criteria have you used to say shop class is what we should add? Why are you highlighting that in particular?
I'm highlighting that because of when I was doing research when I read Brother Lawrence and the Practice of the Presence of God, and when I was researching Tolkien's definition of subcreation. And I think that fit mostly into a shop class. And also when I was reading shop class of Soulcraft, he is a non-believer who talks about the benefits of shop class. And he works as a motorcycle mechanic. And every day he comes home and he feels like a sense of his own worth. And I think as a believer, that feeling for us is like a sense of God's beauty and God's worth and how it helps us and how we feel when we experience God and how he intended us to work and do things. And that includes working with our hands. And so I think shop class fits mostly into those criteria of how does it represent God and how can we do that in a school? And I think carpentry and shop class is a really good choice.
All right, in your paper, you state that in today's world, working with one's hands is seen as something that is lower than other jobs. Students are not going to want to pursue something that is seen as lower than other paths they can take in life. You also state that a student will be hesitant to admit that manual labor or a shop class is something they're interested in because of the reaction they would get from their family and from their peers. So is the devaluing of manual labor driven by the educational system or more by society?
I think it's driven more by our society and how you and your peers and your family would look at it. It reminds me of the thing is like as graduating, it's like, do I go to a junior college or a bigger state school? And it's like there feels something less worth of going to a junior college than of going to a bigger state school. And I think the same thing happens in our society. It's like, I'm going to go to school to be a plumber. And so from people in our point of view, it's like, well, why did I pay for this education? It's like, I paid for you to like learn the liberal arts, learn the Socratic method. And now why are you wanting to go be a plumber and not apply this to your life? And so I think what a shop class can do in a classical school is show how our education impacts those types of jobs and how they are seen as something worth doing. And so that more students can see that and not feel ashamed for wanting to become a carpenter or a plumber, because that's not what everybody else is doing around them.
All right, JT. We move on now to the audience questions. Just as a reminder, we'll start with the adults. You get one question, no follow-up. And most importantly, the microphone is Dr. Merritt's, not mine, and he's very, very stingy, so I will hold it.
Very nice job, JT. As you're talking about shop class, are you looking at that as an elective in classical schools, or are you looking at that as a required core class?
I would want it to be a required core class because of the benefits that I've stated that it can give a student. And also it can be more of a relaxing way for that student to use their education. And I would not want it to be an elective. I would want everybody to at least work with their hands a little bit, even if it's not for them. That's not what they have to go into.
Great job, JT. I'm very proud of you. And I really, really agree with you very strongly. And this is just a strictly personal question. Before you chose tech, did you at all consider any sort of trade school at all for yourself?
I did do some research into it, and it was very fascinating. But I decided to go to tech for other reasons because of what was presented to me and what I feel like I'm being called to do. And so, but it's very cool. And the job opportunities are endless for students who go into them. So
Next question.
I'll let you pull her mic. JT, question for you. You know, our classical education model, it's very strongly rooted in Greco-Roman thought and philosophy. And we do have our Judeo-Christian tradition that's in there as well. But in Greco-Roman thought, the trades, working with your hands, that was, as you put it, low status, right? That if you were a wealthy person, you owned land, you paid other people to work your land for you, and you had the leisure time to study and enhance your mind. And that's kind of been the model in classical education, classical Christian education in some ways, enhancing the mind. But in our Judeo-Christian tradition, we have figures like, I don't know, Christ, who was a carpenter, St. Paul, who was a tent maker. These were skilled tradesmen. Do you think in some ways we need to lean harder on our Judeo-Christian heritage in that regard than the way we've leaned on our Greco-Roman heritage?
yes, so the Greco-Roman tradition isn't based in scripture, and it's coming from a time that was long ago, and where things that we have available to kids today wasn't really considered. And so I understand at that time it would be, to be wealthy, you wouldn't have worked with your hands. But now for us, it's God calls us to be in every aspect of life and calls Christians into every type of situation. And so if we feel called to that, we shouldn't be ashamed or be worried about what people are going to think. And as you said, like Christ was a carpenter and so was his father. And so, well, Joseph, not God, but in that way, it's Jesus grew up doing that sort of thing and participating in subcreation, which benefited him, and it also benefited Joseph and the people around him. So I think we should focus more on the Judeo-Christian aspect of liberal arts and classical education instead of the Greco-Roman.
Next question.
This is fascinating. Thank you, JT. I kept imagining shop class as this bridge between all the academic that you do here and then this real world application. And I'm just so curious to know from you, I suspect that you experienced something of your classical education in subcreation that you've participated in somehow, whether, I don't know if it's your grandfather's farm or what. I'm just so curious to hear what that looked like for you, for your classes to come into play in the doing.
So when I started thinking about this topic, I had just gotten back from working with my grandfather over the summer at his ranch. And I would find myself, whatever we were doing, working with wood, fixing fences, doing things like that, I found that most of the time I would find myself leading towards what I believe and like my relationship with Christ and how that's all working out and where he's calling me. And I found that in those situations, I was able to contemplate, because down there at the range, it's very beautiful. And so in that environment of beauty and working with my hands, I felt closer to God in a sense. And that's why I really enjoy being down there, is that feeling that it gives is you actually feel as if you're in the presence of God and not something that they're teaching you in a classroom. And so that's what I want for students to feel here. It's like this education that I'm learning, like I don't feel anything. I don't feel like it's a Christian education. Like, what does this have to do with God? And I feel like shop class brings in a very cool aspect of that.
Next question.
Oh dear.
You ready, JT?
Yeah,
All right, here it
my
comes.
entire life.
First, JT, let me say well done, and also that you also clean up pretty well.
Thank you. Yes.
And by the way, just on a personal note, if manual labor helps you feel closer to God, I want you to come over anytime, and I want to help you as much as I can in your sanctification.
Thank you.
My question is, and it really dovetails with what Dr. Merritt was just saying. You know, traditionally, shop class sort of thinking was understood to be part of a more vocational, utilitarian, pragmatic kind of view of education. and which is essentially the opposite of a liberal arts. And so I guess I'm wondering if you have any thoughts or helpful direction for us. How do we avoid, if we were to have shop class, how would we avoid shop class degenerating into just a kind of a skills class as it tends to be in many places? Or put it positively, how do we teach it in such a way that it's grounded in and promotes truth, goodness, and beauty, and not simply a utilitarian, pragmatic, vocational exercise?
Emphasizing, well, that in emphasizing that a shop class can do that and be rooted in classical education, truth, goodness, and beauty. I think that we should emphasize how it branches off of the liberal arts and what people have said of how the liberal arts grow our students in virtue and in morality, but also to be able to bring in that sense of beauty and just emphasize the beauty of this and that God is beautiful. And so in doing this, you are participating in something that he has made us to do. And so for a student, I think it can sometimes feel like just working with wood, and like sometimes the way in art is just like, oh, I'm just painting a picture. But really, we need to emphasize with the students how this has been done in the past and why we build things that are beautiful, that resemble God, and then let them go out and learn for themselves in that way.
We've got time for one more quick question, if there is any. Stretching. Oh.
In my pursuit of 2 degrees in visual arts, I had to go to these shop classes to get things built and made. And so how might you envision a collaboration between the subjects, the disciplines, say the physics people design something and then the shop people make it? Because I wish I had known pneumatic tools. I wish I had known how to build things and didn't have to pay the guy from A&M to make plexiglass boxes for me.
So you're asking,
Collaboration, interdisciplinary, cross-discipline.
yes. So I think one way that we can look at that is if we look at something, say like a theater class needs a set for the stage, or like in theater, and they need it for the school play. Like the people in that shop class, like the theater department could come to the shop class and be like, hey, like, could y'all build this for me? And then the students would be able to collaborate together as along with the theater group into like what they're thinking, what they're imagining, and the director, and build these beautiful sets and then be able to put them on a stage and being able to bring people into that story. And it can participate in a lot of senses with every other class, like in a history class, building a flying buttress and then bringing it to a history class and explaining it, or an history class asking for it. But I think that it works very well with the subjects, and collaboration would work really well.
JT, that's it. You're done.